Everyone, it is me, Dr. Anthony Pellegrino from Absolute Chiropractic, and I am so excited to be here today with Lauren Bigelsen, who is an occupational therapist at Abilities in Action, and she is one of the featured amazing speakers coming up at our Learning Behaviors and Emotions half-day workshop on April 23rd in Manasquan, which is going to be a really impactful event for the community, just bringing awareness and action to autism and neurodevelopmental challenges. So I'm so excited to have Lauren with me and with us today. I just really quickly wanted to just read, just for you guys, just a quick bio for Lauren. So Lauren is an occupational therapist with 5 years experience in the field of pediatrics. She works at Abilities in Action, providing outpatient pediatric therapy services, and she works at Special Strides Pediatric Therapy, utilizing Hippotherapy as part of her patient's integrated care plan. Lauren holds a Bachelor of Science and Master's in Occupational Therapy from Ithaca College. She's received training in the areas of DIR floor time, Mary Mastery breathing, postural mechanics, integrative learning system, and the SCIRTS model. And the reason that I wanted to read that is because Lauren is amazing and has really done the work to be at the absolute top of her field in occupational therapy. And gosh, we're just so honored and happy to have you as an amazing resource for so many patients and community members. And I'm so excited to have you speak. So with that being said, one of the things that we were just talking about, Lauren and I, before we got started into the call, is just how passionate she is about helping kids. And that passion is one of the things that's just led her to continue to seek just the utmost, highest levels of certification and understanding and knowledge in the area. And if you guys are Harry Potter fans, what we were also just discussing is that Lauren is a fellow Ravenclaw. Okay, knowledge is really important for her. So with that in mind, Lauren, thank you so much for being on. I hope that was a good intro. And just if you could just share, I just want to hear more about what makes you tick, how you got into occupational therapy and specifically working with kids on the spectrum.
Absolutely. So starting off, it was probably mid high school, but not, asking the questions of what do you want to be when you grow up, and speaking with family members, and my family knows me best. And, I care a lot about people and I like helping people. And that led me into the field of therapy, and then doing my own research between PT, OT, speech. I found my niche in OT. I liked the variety of work, all the different settings that were possible. And I found myself, researching, shadowing in local hospitals, which solidified that's exactly what I wanted to do. And starting at Ithaca College, that led me down the path of the combined bachelor's, master's degree, which brought my foundation of knowledge and my passion. A little bit of a background in college, I did some research. I came across hippotherapy, which combined my upbringing. I used to ride horses all growing up, and I found a way to bring a passion and bring it to a career. So I made that a part of my career path, along with here at Abilities in Action. So fast forward a little bit now, working here full-time at Abilities. I see the patients that I've wanted to with all the neurodevelopmental challenges. And my passion is helping them achieve function and work with the families, because there's such a need for the child, but also the parents, because it's one thing when a child comes here for maybe once or twice a week therapy, but what happens, the other hours, the rest of the day, the rest of the week. So I like to help empower the parent and transfer. I have all this knowledge, but for what? I like to transfer my knowledge to the families and help them, grow their skills to be most functional at home. So my current passion, I like developing the foundations, and that's going to be a big part of our presentation coming up. And in the realm of OT, there's so many different things we look at, but sensory is one of the biggest topics in OT. And it is a passion, because when I work with a child or an adolescent or adult, and you see the immediate changes of addressing the sensory foundations, it gives way to all the function that comes next. And, you just see the work immediately.
Yeah.
So I'm passionate because I see that it works, and I believe what I see.
Yeah, I love that. Now, for those who don't know, can you tell us more about like what hippotherapy is?
Yeah, so hippotherapy is a tool. It's very tricky with semantics because the field is working on how to use it appropriately. So when a child or any individual gets recommended for a therapy service, and maybe by their pediatrician, hippotherapy, they're first and foremost coming for OT, PT, or speech. And that occupational therapist, physical therapist, or speech therapist will be utilizing the horse as a tool. So the horse provides the hippotherapy tool, just like in a clinic, you might use like a therapy ball. That's a tool of your therapy session. The horse is the tool. I'm not doing therapy to the horse, which is a common misconception. The child would be sitting on the horse and guided through a whole session of therapeutic tasks. And the biggest foundation of it is that the human pelvis mimics a horse pelvis. So they absorb the triplanar motion that the horse gives them. So it provides everything from rhythmicity to visual flow as you move through an environment, and all of the sensory foundations, which I think ties back into everything that I stand for. But, when a child is on top of that horse, they're getting tactile input from the feel of the horse's hair. They're getting deep pressure from the bouncing motion of the horse, visual, auditory input, outdoor or indoor. At Special Strides, we have the luxury of using like a beautiful outdoor, they have a whole back pathway through the woods, and that's our therapy clinic. It's very unique.
That's so cool. So I've just never heard I was hoping that it would be on a hippopotamus, but I guess I was wrong there. So a lot of, my patients specifically from my experience do love like equine therapy. Is hippotherapy, is they just two different words for the same thing, or is hippotherapy like something that takes it to the next level or a different application of that?
It's a different application. So hippotherapy can only be used by an OT, PT, or a speech therapist.
Okay.
Equine facilitated therapy could be in the realm of psychotherapy done by, a social worker, which might be more groundwork. There's another term, therapeutic riding, which isn't necessarily done by a therapist. It's done by a PATH certified instructor. But it is still working with individuals with special needs that just need another level of therapeutic instruction. But the hippotherapy lies in the practice done by a therapy session for OT, PT, or speech.
That's awesome. And I mean, I'm so glad that you told me about that. I'm learning more and about that. I love everything you said about the horse pelvis mimicking the human pelvis, which is so true. There's a really cool documentary called Life Adjusted that actually looks at animal chiropractic, and I'll send it over. You probably like it. And actually specifically not just for performance, but actually for sensory input and trauma. And so it's right up your alley. But everything you're saying to me just makes so much sense after looking at all that. A lot of the language that just listening to you talk, and again, I just love hearing your like passion come through when you're talking about this. I can tell that you're really passionate about this. I'm so excited to have you. A lot of the words you use were things like, I want to be able to transfer knowledge to parents, right? And which is for me, it feels like you have such a focus on empowerment for so many families and really helping them develop those proper sensory foundations, right? And a lot of times when we think of occupational therapy, a lot of times how it's utilized, and I hope that me saying this, and if I say anything incorrect, please clear it up, right? A lot of times there's almost this misconception, and we think of OT as just trying to learn to like hold a pen right? And it's like And we had a conversation yesterday with Lisa from the from Spectrum Tech Trade School, and we talked about how, you know, a child can hold their pen right and write their name, but then the second that you ask them to write something that they've never written before, like, we go back to a different way of holding it, right? Because we're only focused on the output. But you're saying, hey, that's part of the picture, of course, but we need to focus on creating the foundation so that the brain pathways are there to be able to hold the pen right in the first place, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Beautifully said. Yeah.
What do you look at and how do you go about creating that foundation?
Yeah, I feel like that's a great way to kind of segue into like how to look at the input to get the output. So specifically about, you know, just holding a pencil, because a lot of people do look at OT as, you know, help my child hold a pencil and write. In a lot of school settings, that's what you might see. And I do get a lot of kids here as well that, you know, need to work on those fine motor skills. And, you know, the parent comes in with the goal for their child to be able to write legibly. And I'm excited to get that child in because that's the goal, but there's going to be so many things to look at to get there. And to speak about how broad that could be, a piece could be motivation, emotional investment in an activity. If a child has no motivation to write, or they perceive it as a challenge. So we're not even talking about the hand muscles or the skill of holding a pencil yet, just, maybe like a 4 or 5-year-old child starting their journey into the school system and already, you know, perceives writing as a horrible experience. So OT addresses emotional regulation, frustration tolerance. So I find that really interesting because a foundation to handwriting could be motivation and emotions, emotional regulation. Some other things that can go into a skill, so simple as, you know, holding a pencil or handwriting, you know, you're going to have to look at their posture. Again, we're not even looking at the hand muscles yet or putting that hand on the pencil, but how the child sits upright in a chair. So when a child comes in for an evaluation, I might be looking at, you know, if they're sitting upright, if they're slouching, if their ankles are crossed, to gain stability. If when they start to do their work, they have that oral motor overflow where their mouth starts to move because they're focusing so hard. So there's a lot of foundations that I'm looking at there. If I notice any instability in the posture, then there's a foundation to work on right there, because you can't have any distal control, so anything from the arm out, if you don't have the postural stability. So I work in to out. So before I even address the hand, I'll start on posture, on core muscles, on pelvic alignment, spine alignment, and then work once I see that foundation built, then I can move forward and work, you know, that we're going to continue outward. So maybe there's instability in the shoulder, the elbow, the wrist. So continue to work outward to the hand. Other foundations, going back to the sensory conversation, is body awareness. It's a huge piece of, a huge thing of what I look at when I evaluate kids, because if they don't have the proprioceptive body awareness, that's that pressure system, then they might not be able to feel where their hand is in space, and holding a pencil might feel like a foreign object. So I work through my sensory regiment to get them bombardment of their pressure system to their hands, and that might include wheelbarrow walking or push-ups on a therapy ball, or climbing through a tunnel, or climbing up a ladder, like anything to engage the hands and bring pressure to the area to tell that child, this is where my hand is in space, and, you know, I'm ready to use this on a pencil. And that pairs immediately with the tactile system. So sometimes some tactile exploration, you might hear in the world of OT, like sensory bins. So, you know, getting those hands dug deep into like a bean bin, and exploring, pulling through heavy tactile mediums like a Theraputty or Play-Doh. And in turn, that goes back to the very first piece, but using emotional regulation just by playing. The child perceives himself as having a good time and while working through the foundations. And then finally, when they get to the point of a skill, going back to the handwriting, but taking them back to that skill of handwriting, they've built the foundations. Now they have the proper setup for success. And then I finally work on the actual skill. But that might be sessions and sessions down the line. And I help educate the family to understand that if I, practice handwriting daily, it's not going to do anything. I need to change the foundations first.
Yeah. I love that. Now it's so funny. Like just thinking of it as just an analogy. It's like when, as a parent, we, could tell a kid something and then they always ask why. And then you give them an answer and it's like, it's why and why and why. And all of a sudden you're in some existential crisis. Don't have the answer. You're like, where are we? Like, do we actually exist? Right. And kids can bring us there. And this is a wild analogy here, but it sounds like your process is always asking why, right? Okay. So kiddo can't write. Well, you continue this example because it's so easy. Well, why can't they? Well, because they don't have stability of the shoulder. Okay, well, why don't I have this stability of the shoulder? Well, because this. Okay, well, why? And we keep asking why until we get to the root. And that root probably almost always comes in foundation, right? So one of the things that we talk a lot about is, it's actually stole from occupational therapy textbook, is the pyramid of learning, right? And so often, when we look at and we have these, we mentioned like emotional regulation, like that's all at the highest level of development. And if we start there, if we start at behavior, if we start at emotion, if we start at regulation, like we're missing the whole iceberg, right? And underneath there, it's like, well, why? Right? Okay, well, then there's body awareness, right? Well, then why? And then it's like, okay, well, there's gross fine motor control. Okay, well, there's attention centers. Well, why? And then even when it comes down to like primitive reflexes, which we talk about at OT, like this is where we come a lot in the same world. Every child is checked for these reflexes during the first year of life, right? Obviously, like a child should have a rooting reflex. They should have a spinal galant. They should have an asymmetrical tonic neck reflex. And everybody checks for that to make sure that they're there, because if they're not there, they have a problem. But then it's like no one ever checks to make sure that those integrate properly, right? And it's like, well, even beyond that, well, okay, so there's unintegrated primitive reflexes, so we can give exercises, but why did they not integrate, right? So it's constantly asking that question, and that's why I love working with you on this, because it's about creating those foundations.
Yeah, and the same question of asking why, like in with the primitive reflexes, I encourage families to ask why when it comes to a sensory behavior, especially for these early school age kids. So, going back to this handwriting topic, but, why is their hand like shaking when they're writing, or why is their pencil grip way too tight, or why is their pressure coming out really light? I like where you're going with that, asking why. And I feel like I continue to ask why. And in a treatment session, if something's not working that I'm doing, I ask myself why. And then I change what I'm doing.
Right.
Because, you go by the rule, if it doesn't work the first time, we'll try again. If it doesn't work the second time, you're doing something wrong. So, keep changing. I keep changing what I'm doing to fit the individual. And that's a big part of it too, is that each child that comes through the door is such an individual and requires such a different foundational approach. So working through that pyramid, bottom to top, might be a different process for one kid to the next with the same presentation.
Mm-hmm.
You might need to work on one sensory system versus the other. So it really, every part of OT is an individualistic approach, which is another thing that I'm passionate about, is because I just really get to learn and understand the child, what makes them who they are, and how to motivate them and work with them through the foundations to achieve their goals.
Yeah. That's awesome. And then if you're a parent listening and the whole primitive reflex conversation of that, like, didn't make sense, but you're intrigued and you're wondering, super easy. Like, and if you ever just, I do workshops, you do a ton, come to the event. Like, I don't know how much we're going to get into the specifics of like reflex. It is such a detailed topic and there's so much that we're going to cover, but like super easy example. Most people know that if you put your finger in a baby's hand, they're going to grip it. Right. And that should integrate, like that shouldn't, if you would think as an adult, if I put my finger in your hand and you could not contract your hand, that would be a problem, right? Like that reflex should go away when proper brain pathways have integrated so that the reflex is no longer required. We'll find kids 6, 9, 12, 15 years old, which maybe they don't have a full hand contraction, but if you swipe their hand, they have to contract it. How is that kid going to be able to hold a pen? Like, how are they going to be able to hold a pencil? Right? Of course, they're going to have trouble sitting still in school when they're trying to do things because that is a brain pathway and their brain is on fire every time it's stimulated, like a circuit breaker going off. So if you're noticing these things in your child, yes, April 23rd, right? Come register at the link that's in the text. Call Lauren, call me, get evaluated by someone who's going to look at these things and look at the entirety of the picture, because it just might be the missing link that you have been looking for that unlocks your child's healing. Did I say that correctly there, Lauren?
Beautifully said.
Cool. Anything else you want to add or take away, or anything I should have asked you that I didn't?
Nothing comes to mind, but I'm just excited to share this knowledge with our community. I connect really closely with the families that come to our facility, as I'm sure you do with yours. And it would be nice to see some new faces out in the community and, through our presentations and the booths that will be held on that day. It's a great opportunity to just speak one-on-one with some of you out there. So I'm always happy to answer questions, and it's a passion of mine to just be able to share what I know. And help you and help achieve function and safety and work one at a time towards the goals that you have for your child and family.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I'm so honored to have you speaking at the event. Again, guys, it's going to be April 23rd. That's a Saturday, 9:30 a.m. at the St. Denis Church in Manasquan. Please, if you liked what you heard today, you definitely got to make it. We're going to go way deeper. And man, I'm just so honored to be here and have the opportunity to be able to share all this information with you guys. Lauren, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to put you mentioned a couple different things. We mentioned abilities. We mentioned the Hippotherapy, which you do at, and I'm forgetting the name. It's Saving Strides.
Special Strides.
Special Strides. I'm going to just tag all of that in the comments below. I'll also put the registration link for the events in the comments too. So guys, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.